carry this man to his final resting place. Now, I want to point out something here that we read from this version. It says here that Jesus touched the coffin. In the King James Version, you're going to find a little four-letter word, B-I-E-R. I think the word is bier. And bier is not really a coffin. And here's the reason. Those who had some money had reason then to buy a coffin for their son or their daughter or whoever, their loved one. But this lady here could not extract enough money to buy a coffin, so she has a bier. Now, a bier is like a pallet. It's like a stretcher. That's all she could afford. And so here her son is all wound up. I mean, the grave clothes are on him, but the only thing that's visible is his face. So get that in mind. The body was carried upon a bier. Alfred Eldersheim describes it as a wicker conveyance. There's no casket, especially no closed casket, and we went through there and talked to you about what that would be like. But there were those that we'd call pallbearers who decided to go the last journey with her and help her in this mournful, pitiful state. Now, I want us to look at her widowhood for a second before we get into the crunch of this message, because you got to see the compassion of Jesus about this widow. I mean, this poor lady's husband is gone, so she has no way of having money being poured into her. There's no social insurance. There's no kind of government assistance at all. She's all on her own. Her son has been her probably chief way of making money for the family, and now he's gone. So here she has a very bleak future. There are no jobs for widows, and especially in the womanhood of that day, that's going to be another issue to face. And so how does it all flesh itself out? It could be a very lonely and dismal time for any widow. But Jesus' heart went out to her. The gospel simply says about this situation, when the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Now, you know, as a father or as a mother, you often say to our children, "Don't cry." What we're really saying is, things are going to get better. We're going to help you through this. Don't cry. This is just a little temporary setback. So Jesus says to this woman, and says to the crowd, "Don't cry," especially to the woman. The Greek word is, and it's a long word, I won't even give it to you. It's too long of a word to pronounce, and you'll forget it anyways. The Greek word simply says, he has pity, he felt compassion for her, and that word compassion really means it went to the very depths of his being, the seat of his emotions. In our usage, it touched the heart of Jesus. Perhaps Jesus saw in his own mother that coming widowhood. Perhaps that's why he was moved with compassion. We're not really told. Perhaps an aunt or a neighbor who had experienced this, and Jesus had seen that. Maybe that's why he was moved with compassion. Maybe it's simply because of her weeping. We don't know, because we look at John 11, and the shortest verse in the Bible of John 11:35 says Jesus wept. So don't get any idea this morning that Jesus is not moved with compassion at this situation or yours this morning when we weep, because he does. And so Jesus comes along, he sees all of this. The women are in front, still overflowing with tears. Just a lot of mourning. And Jesus, in his compassion, reaches over and he touches this bier, touches this wicker kind of outfit that this boy is on, and he has told him not to cry. And then he simply addresses this man, "Young man, I say to you, get up." Now, the word young man, if you go back into the original, really means this guy is probably between the ages of 24 and 40. Young man's between 24 and 40. That's a young man back in the New Testament. And so Jesus says to him, "Young man, I say to you, get up." Jesus' voice is clear in the stillness, and still all those around are thinking, what's going to happen here? Jesus is talking to a dead man. He touches this coffin with his bier and says to the man, young man, I say to you, get up. Suddenly the dead man sits up on his bier, still held high on the shoulders of those who are carrying him. An involuntary gasp, I'm sure, can be heard among the crowd. I mean, how often have you gone to a funeral and have somebody say to the dead person, I say to you, get up? Now, we have wished a dozen times and more that would happen. But to my knowledge, there's probably not a one here who's ever done that. It would be something to behold. Perhaps some recoiled in shock. And the dead man, now alive, isn't quite sure to make of what happened with all of this, I'm sure. And it's kind of hard to describe because we have never been to death and back. So what's he feeling? What's he feeling? Can you imagine yourself being dead? If you can imagine yourself being dead this morning, I know it's hot in here, so it's not quite that bad, but to come back to life again. I have often thought in the story of Lazarus, poor Lazarus, maybe Jesus is weeping because these people want Jesus to bring their brother back, which is fine, but poor Lazarus has been in the presence of Jesus for 4 days. How would you like to be called back after spending 4 days in the presence of God? That's another story. But here Jesus touches this situation and says to him, I say to you, get up. Then I find a very interesting thing here that Jesus presents this boy back to his mother. And we're going to come to that at the end of the message this morning. But there are other things I really want to look at here and highlight to you this morning. So what does this story teach us about God? What does it teach us about prayer? I think the key words in this whole passage is that when the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he simply said to her, don't cry. Now I want to make this very relevant this morning to us, because I believe with all my heart that Jesus many times has spoken to us by his Spirit and through the Word, and he simply told us, don't cry. In other words, this is just temporary. I'm on the scene. Because as the book of Exodus says, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, is slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger. The Lord encourages his disciples to call upon the Father. In that day you will ask in my name. I'm not saying that I will ask the Father on your behalf. No, the Father himself loves you, and because you love me and believe that I'm from God, in other words, Jesus is saying because you believe in me, you're believing in God the Father, and you can ask him and believe him to touch your heart and touch your life and whatever that issue is in your life. The book of Hebrews very clearly points it out. We have a high priest who's not unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we do know that he was tempted in all points like we as we are, yet without sin. So therefore, the writer to the book of Hebrews tells us that we should approach the throne of grace to find confidence and go with confidence so that we can find mercy to help us in time of need. So there we are. There's a quick story this morning, but I really felt that we have to talk about death here this morning because Jesus raises this man from the dead back to life. And so we got to look at death here this morning. And I in a way, I'm sorry for that, but I'm not, because I think we really have to, in reality, face the possibility of death. So letter A this morning, if you've got your outline there and you want to fill in the blanks, death, by definition, is a separation. There's the first thing I think we ought to know. When we die, physical death is a separation of the spirit from the body. Jesus had made that very clear in Genesis 2:7 to Adam and Eve. In the day that you sin, you shall surely die. When the spirit leaves our body, we are dead. Spiritual death is death. The second death is a separation of the soul from God. That's still under that category, by definition, is a separation. And let's just pause there just for a half a moment and say this. If one disregards the doctrine of hell as a place of eternal torment, which I don't know how biblically we can do that, but even if only death brings about eternal separation from God, that's hell in itself. Because you see, we come here and we experience the presence of God. We go to our Bible studies. We go to our secret closet of prayer. We go to our bedroom. We go to our living room. We have devotions with our family, whatever, and we get to experience the presence of God. But can you imagine being eternally separated from Him? Death is life's great mystery. Therefore, it's only natural for people, in a sense, without God, to fear death. Only the faithful Christian has reason to face death with confidence. You know, I mentioned the other day, and you know, the only reason that I was troubled by it is because I recognized that I had the potential of being run over by that lady and the potential of dying. And I'm all ready to die, but I feel like I've got all kinds of things I want to see happen before I leave this world. I've got some grandchildren I'd like to see walk down the aisle, and I'd like to officiate at their wedding. I'd like to officiate at the dedication of their church. I've got all kinds of things I want to do before I exit this world. I'm no anxious hurry to get out of this world. But I do recognize it is a separation. Even though a faithful Christian does not know everything about death, that person doesn't need to be afraid. That's why we read Psalm 23, verse 4 this morning, actually the whole psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'm not going to fear any evil, for thou art with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Death is but a shadow. Somebody has said death is but a comma in the story of life. It's not a period, just a comma. But on the other hand, letter B, death is an ending. To the believer, it is the end. You say, how can it be the end? Aren't you really saying there's something after death? Yes. The unbeliever, or the one that's unfaithful, can see nothing beyond the grave. There are many people who do not look beyond the grave, and many people have an idea, well, when I'm buried, that's it. I just came back from a camp meeting. I talked to a pastor friend of mine, said, Larry, I'm sorry I'm not going to be here tomorrow. I've got to go to a funeral. I said, Pastor Ron, anyone I know? Well, it's my daughter's first husband. I said, oh my. I said, he was only 44, 45. Yes, but he's dead. I said, did he make peace with God? We talked to him about that. He said, actually, my son-in-law called up and said, I hear this man is dying. Would he like it if I came and talked to him? So Ronald went and said, Lloyd wants to come and talk to you about your soul. Is that all right? No, it is not all right. I don't want him. I don't want you. I don't want to have anyone talk to me about what's going to happen. He said, I've lived all my life for self and what I've wanted to do, and I'm not going to die a coward. I'm going to go to hell, and I don't want anybody to talk to me otherwise. Can you imagine such, shall I use the word stupidity as that? And arrogance? Some people have made that choice. The unbeliever that's unfaithful. Those who are unprepared for death have a horrible surprise waiting. The rich man found death to be the end of his previous lifestyle. All opportunities, all those kinds of things ended. Death is an ending. Letter C, you're going to say you're mixing your sermon up. You're all sermon up. Confused. No, I'm not. Letter C, death is a beginning, because I've talked to you about the believer. But for the believer, and even for the unbelieving, unfaithful, death is death.